While the X-Men universe is filled with several powerful mutants capable of ruling the universe, they often cower in fear in the presence of Sentinels. These creatures have remained a huge threat to mutant kind, and they have even destroyed nearly all life on Earth in their attempt to eradicate mutants. While humans initially built Sentinels to establish their status quo, these beings evolved into deadly machines over the course of time. They now pose a threat to humans and mutants alike, and today we will especially explore Nano and Wild Sentinels and tell you everything about them. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Who are Nano Sentinels? Created with the help of the same technology that Bolivar Trask implemented to create the first Sentinels, the Nano Sentinels first appeared in the New X-Men Volume 1, Issue 123. These beings were constructed by the Wild Sentinels, and they can be best described as microscopic nanomachines capable of eating away at a human's cells from the inside. In fact, the Wild Sentinels created these Nano Sentinels with the intention of releasing them into the mutant bloodstream, so that they could be killed off from within. In most cases, the beings infected by these Nano Sentinels did not even realize that something strange was happening within their bodies, and only experienced flu-like symptoms. These symptoms were a direct result of these microorganisms attacking their host white blood cells to weaken them from within, and Beast eventually discovered this artificial sickness by studying mutant blood cells. As these Sentinels became widely known, renowned arms dealer Cade Kilgore pretended to own a bunch of them to lure Kid Omega, Morph, and Hindsight into leaving their Xavier Institute to attend his auction at Kilgore Industries. Later, Forge developed a new version of these Nano Sentinels, while being mind-controlled by Cassandra Nova. This variant could not only enable humans to detect the presence of the X gene in their environment, but also drive humans to kill mutants impulsively. In a grand plan orchestrated by Cassandra, these Nano Sentinels were implanted in the bodies of several world leaders so that they could wreak havoc. She went one step further and infected Storm with a Sentinite, which compelled the X-Man to attack Wakanda. Cassandra's plans were in full force as she somehow managed to infect Teen Abomination and unleashed another Sentinite attack on the X-Men, but she was eventually defeated by a new X-Men recruit named Trinary. Trinary was a technopath, and she soon realized that Cassandra intended to release these Sentinites in major cities to trigger a worldwide infestation. She immediately took action and worked with the X-Men to connect every single Sentinite and destroy them before they could spread chaos in the world. Who are Wild Sentinels? Known as a specialized breed of Sentinels, the Wild Sentinels were created by Donald Trask III and Cassandra Nova as they followed the instructions laid down by the Master Mold. These Sentinels were created especially to scour and repurpose any technological pieces that were littered around, and they lacked the standardization that most Sentinel models followed. The Wild Sentinels were free to do as they pleased, and they once constructed a hybrid with some waste components of a helicopter and another piece of technology that resembled 3 Sentinel heads joined together. Sadly, Trask could not work on their creation for too long as he fell prey to Master Mold's machinery that replicated his DNA. In the wake of this accident, Master Mold sent 2 Wild Sentinels to Genosha to destroy the population and wreak havoc on the place. During the E for Extinction story arc, the Wild Sentinels were created as a result of a US-funded mission in Ecuador, which aimed to design Sentinels that could sustain themselves in the wild. Master Mold was the lead Wild Sentinel in this mission, and Bolivar Trask built him to get his hands on any scrap technology in the area and erect multiple troops from it. As time passed, Trask worked in cahoots with Cassandra Nova and even ordered the Master Mold to abandon this mission, as they had no use for him anymore. They even sent 4 Wild Sentinels to get rid of Master Mold in Genosha, and the entire battle was so devastating that nearly 16 million mutants died as collateral damage. As time passed, 2 Wild Sentinels appeared on the shores of Genosha with the intention of causing large-scale destruction to the mutant population, and they were more than successful in this mission. While Genosha used to be a thriving nation, their attack reduced the place to a wasteland with barely any survivors. After having done the damage, these Sentinels decided to go into hibernation, but the attack scarred the mutants, and they remained cowering in fear. They dreaded the day when these Sentinels might make their return, especially since they had disappeared without leaving any signs behind. As the survivors felt unsettled, Toad led the surviving mutants and enlisted their help in collecting the remains of a 3-headed Sentinel to create a memorial dedicated to Magneto. This memorial was their way of showing resistance against the Sentinels, who were long gone, but the damage they had done was etched into the minds of the survivors. Everywhere they went, they saw the signs of the attack, and Beast once encountered a mutant cat with mysterious marks that suggested that the Wild Sentinels might still be around. At some point in their story arc, the Wild Sentinels hijacked a cargo ship known as the Amazon Belle to make their way to Chicago. Over the course of their journey, these Sentinels used everything available on board to create as many Wild Sentinels as possible, and they even killed almost every single Coast Guard that came in their way on the Canadian coastline. As they finally pulled up in Chicago, these Sentinels labeled every single single being to be a potential mutant, and they went on a killing spree to eradicate every last one of them. They killed beings such as Joey Cascio and Maria Bonaventura, and they did not even spare animals such as dogs, before making their way to actual mutants such as Kitty Pryde and Swan Dalmain. Satisfied with the chaos they had unleashed, the Wild Sentinels decided to target the University of Chicago next, and they crashed a public debate that took the crowd by surprise. While the police force and the campus security scrambled to get things under control, Kitty Pryde showed up alongside Shan and Shola to defeat the Sentinels. They were successful in their attempt, and they managed to kill almost every one of them except one, who also suffered great damage. While Tremaine took this Sentinel home to repair it, Kitty and Shola expressed their satisfaction after finally avenging their parents' death on Genosha. In due course, the giant Wild Sentinel was revived by Danger, who wanted to use him to kill Professor Xavier. This three-headed Sentinel was bestowed with intelligence, and Kitty Pryde eventually found him and convinced him to think about his actions and all the destruction he had caused in the past. Ridden with guilt over his past, the giant Wild Sentinel soon left to spend time alone and reflect on his actions. Soon after, a bunch of Wild Sentinels attacked a mutant settlement in Ecuador, but the Office of National Emergency dealt with this threat by sending their own standard Sentinels to minimize the damage before things got out of control. As time passed, the giant Wild Sentinel returned to Earth during the Breakworld bullet incident. After the X-Men heroes were incapacitated as a result of the magical properties of the bullet, this Sentinel stepped up to transport them to Peak Station, and also save the world by sending the bullet off its orbit. While this Wild Sentinel was on a journey of repenting for his sins, a bunch of Wild Sentinels in South Dakota lured the X-Men to their location and launched an attack on them. While these Sentinels were prepared to do damage, the X-Men emerged victorious in this attack and ripped them to pieces. During their victory, the X-Men stumbled across a Sentinel head that contained the consciousness of Cerebra, which left them surprised as they came to the realization that she somehow managed to save her presence amid a deadly attack. Among other Wild Sentinels, Scrap had quite a reputation due to his need for mutant energy to keep going. He was once saved by Alice Tremaine, who repaired him only for him to go ahead and absorb the powers of every mutant in Chicago. Wild Sentinels in the Multiverse? While this was all about their appearances in the mainstream universe, Wild Sentinels were found across the multiverse on numerous Earths. To begin with, a giant Wild Sentinel once wrought havoc on Earth 92131 by gate-crashing the banquet on Genosha. Gambit, Rogue, and Magneto stepped up to fight him and rescue Morlocks from his clutches. And in a tragic twist of events, Magneto supposedly died while trying to save Morlocks. In the wake of this, Rogue lunged at Sentinel in a fit of rage, but Gambit pushed her aside and took matters into his own hands. Gambit did put up a good fight, but the Sentinel overpowered him and impaled him to death. In another universe, the Wild Sentinels made an appearance on Battleworld, aka Earth 15513. When MODOK was captured by Baron Mondo, he took control of every single Sentinel within Sentinel territories to free himself, and the Wild Sentinels greatly aided him. On Earth 42221, Ultron and Danger managed to kill the X-Men with some help from the Wild Sentinels. Later, these Sentinels captured Professor Xavier and presented him as a gift to Ultron and Danger, who then ordered the Sentinels to crush Xavier. Powers and abilities of Wild Sentinels. These Wild Sentinels were mighty dangerous beings, with a horde of powers and abilities that fueled their strength and highlighted the threat they posed to mutant kind. To begin with, they were extremely adaptive beings who could function in any environment all across the multiverse without any system glitches. They were also equipped with a danger sense that enabled them to detect any incoming threats and prepare themselves accordingly. When it comes to being on the offense, the Wild Sentinels could blast power, disrupt electronic energy, and deploy a range of weapons to target the mutants' weaknesses. They had attained mastery over every weapon and gadget imaginable, and they had essentially attained invulnerability, which made it nearly impossible for the X-Men to wipe them out of existence. They could also levitate in the air and even fly at full speed, and their bodies were equipped with a radar sense that allowed them to navigate the skies. The Wild Sentinels were intelligent beings with super strength, which essentially means that they had brains and brawn. They could also conjure up force fields, shapeshift, and perform technopathy, and they were essentially powerhouses of energy and strength. Marvelous verdict. To wrap things up, the Nano and Wild Sentinels are extremely accomplished variants of the Sentinels, and they've managed to stir up quite some trouble for the X-Men. From the way these Nano Sentinels can corrupt the mutants from within, to the Wild Sentinels' ability to blast power and trigger electronic disruption, these beings can cause a lot of destruction, and it's advisable to steer clear of them. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone!